Super excited to be here with Jessica and Lee. A few more people coming in.
I see people I know. This is so exciting.
Oh, that's fantastic. This is so fun. There's more people. All right.
Hi, Jessica. Hi, Lee.
Hey, Susan.
Hey, Susan.
Hey, Ellen. Hi, George. Oh my gosh, I'm not going to say hi to everybody because then that's just what we'll do all night.
I'm so glad you see people you know. That's great.
Ellen, I thought you were doing a reading of your own tonight.
No, that was last week.
Oh, last week. Okay.
Yeah. So
all right.
Glad to be here.
Oh, thanks for being here.
All right. I'm going to go ahead and introduce both of our authors today, and then they have some great questions and readings planned for you guys. So after I introduce them, I'll turn it over to Jessica to ask Lee questions or for readings or whatever she has planned. It sounds really fun. So if you have any questions, please plug them into the chat window for me and I'll voice them for the authors towards the end of our meeting here. And if you know anyone who's having any trouble logging on, just have them email me or respond to the Eventbrite email and I will help them out. So first I'll introduce Lee Martin. He's the author of many novels, including The Bright Forever, which was a finalist for the 2006 Pulitzer Prize in Fiction. He is also the author of Yours, Jean, The Mutual UFO Network, and Late One Night, among others. His fiction and nonfiction have appeared in such places as Harper's, Creative Nonfiction, and the Best American Essays. The winner of the Mary McCarthy Prize in Short Fiction, the 2006 Alumni Award for Distinguished Teaching, and fellowships from the National Endowment for the Arts and the Ohio Arts Council, Martin teaches in the MFA program at The Ohio State University, where he is a College of Arts and Sciences Distinguished Professor. And we are talking about his book, Gone the Hard Road, of course, today. And we have some beautiful signed copies of those in stock. Jessica Handler is going to be talking to him today, and she is the author of the novel with Hub City Press, The Magnetic Girl, and winner of the 2020 Southern Book Prize, an Indie Next pick, Wall Street Journal Spring 2019 pick, Bitter Southerners Summer 2019 pick, and a Zebra Okra pick. Her memoir, Invisible Sisters, which I also have right here, was named one of the 25 books all Georgians should read, and her craft guide, Braving the Fire, a guide to writing about grief and loss, was praised by Vanity Fair magazine. Her writing has appeared on NPR, in Tin House, Drunken Boat, The Bitter Southerner, Brevity, Creative Nonfiction, Newsweek, The Washington Post, Electric Lit, and More magazine. She teaches creative writing at Oglethorpe University in Atlanta and lectures internationally on writing. And she's actually joining us from a residency today. We're so grateful to have her. Thank you both for joining us, Lee and Jessica. We're so excited to talk to you. And I believe Jessica wanted to start off with a question for Lee.
I do. Let's see, I'm trying to change the view here so I can see who I'm looking at. There's Lee. Hi. First of all, thank you everybody so much for being here. And Lee, it's a pleasure to see you, even if you are a postage stamp on my digital screen. So soon in real life. This is a wonderful book and a wonderful memoir. And Lee has been a mentor and friend to me for many years. So this is a real special pleasure for me. I want to start off by asking you, Lee, to read a short section from Gone the Hard Road.
Sure, I can absolutely do that. But first, let me thank everyone who has stopped by to give us an hour of your time tonight. I'm hoping that the weather is really beautiful wherever you are. And so I really appreciate you stopping by. And Jessica, I'm so indebted to you for doing this evening. And Jackie, you have just been amazing arranging all of this. And so big shout out to Jackie and everyone there at Hub City. Just been a glorious experience. Before I read, if you don't mind, I think there are just like a few things that you need to know before I read this little section. First of all, the title, Gone the Hard Road. I grew up in a very rural part of southeastern Illinois on a farm with gravel roads intersecting at right angles. And the paved road that took us into the small town of Sumner, Illinois, population 1,000. We called it the blacktop, we called it the slab, we called it the hard road. So if you were gone the hard road, you were going somewhere outside of those gravel roads. You know, I've written memoirs before, and many of you know my whole story, but just in case you don't, it seems to me that, for me anyway, when I write memoir, there are certain facts of my history that are always present with me, even if I'm not directly writing about that part of my experience. So you need to know that I was a surprise baby. I was never meant to come along. My mother was 45 years old when I was born. My father was 42. And a little over a year after I was born, my father lost both of his hands in a farming accident and became a really troubled, often angry man. So I'm going to read just a little bit from the very opening of Gone the Hard Road. And this is where we begin. After my father was dead, my mother told me the story of the day they learned she was pregnant. They got the news in Doc Stoll's office. And the first thing my father said to the good doctor was, "Can you get rid of it?" I've written about this moment before, the moment when my father, concerned for my mother's health at that advanced age for childbearing, asked Doc Stoll if he could perform an abortion. I imagine that question hanging in the air of the office, my father waiting for Doc Stoll's response. I keep thinking about those few seconds when it was possible that Doc Stoll might say yes, and then I wouldn't exist. Wouldn't have been the son of Roy and Beulah Martin from rural Route 1, Sumner, Illinois. Wouldn't have had the 64 years I've now had to know pleasure and joy and injury and suffering. Wouldn't have had this life. I can't get the thought out of my head that there were those few seconds when it was possible that my parents would have been rid of me. But Doc Stoll said, no, indeed, he couldn't do that. This baby, I imagine him saying in his gruff voice, will get born and you'll just have to deal with that. No matter how far I've come from the country kid I was, I can never forget the family we were. My kind mother who loved books, my wounded father whose intense love often got swallowed up inside his rage, and me, the only child, eager to escape my life and to immerse myself in someone else's story. Whenever we drove the hard road, I often found myself imagining all the places that lay beyond it and wondering if given the chance, I might someday see them, might move beyond those gravel roads, might leave behind me the dust and the fields, might finally know exactly where I belonged. I fell in love with books and the life of the imagination at an early age. And because of that, the world opened to me. I can still see myself sitting beside my mother in Doc Stoll's waiting room, a Highlight for Children magazine open between us. She holds one side of it, I hold the other. Some of my fondest memories from childhood are the times we spent alone together, safely away from my father's temper. She helps me with the words I don't know. We do the puzzles. We find the hidden pictures, and we read the jokes. Sometimes she reads a story to me. Her voice is soft, and I want to listen to it forever. I like to think she believes her life has turned out exactly how she always wanted it to be. Always wanted to be a mother. Always wanted me, her son, and was glad that day when Doc Stoll said no, he couldn't get rid of it. This baby would have to be born. Read another one, I say to her when she finishes a story. And she does. My kind and patient mother. I can still hear her. All right, she says. Then she turns the page and we begin.
That is just gorgeous. And as much as I loved reading it with my eyes, I also love hearing you read it, because you bring this beautiful writing even more so to life and imbue it with even more meaning. So one of the things I want to ask you, we have a lot to talk about, but one of the things I want to ask you is, you write at the beginning of the book, maybe my story begins long before I was born. And one of the things that I noticed is, I've only seen this idea in writing once before in memoir. Harry Crews did it in A Childhood. And it's a wonderful technique. And I want to ask you about what you mean by your story beginning before you were born. Writing about yourself before.
Oh, well, that's a really interesting question, Jessica, and I've never really thought about it all that much, to tell you the truth. It's not like I thought I was following in Harry Crews's footsteps or anything like that.
I'm evil. Yeah.
But I just think that I enjoy thinking about what life was like for the people that I eventually became a part of. And if your experience is like mine, where your family had some sort of tragedy or some sort of loss close to or preceding your birth, then I think you can see how you carry that with you.
Right.
You carry that sort of inheritance with you. So in this case, to think about that moment that I just described, that moment in the doctor's office when my father posed that question, can you get rid of it?
Yeah.
I cannot not write about that. It's part of who I am, that fact. And as I said, even though, my mother surprised me with this story after my father was gone. And when she told me what he said, she was very nonchalant about it, as if it hadn't occurred to her what that would feel like for me to hear that my father had asked if the doctor could get rid of it. So I don't blame my mother for this at all. And I really don't blame my father either. I'm sure my father was concerned about my mother's health, having a child at that advanced stage. But still, it's a fact that I can't escape, and it's a fact that resonates into the rest of my life, really.
Yeah, yeah. And it's a memoir of you, and it's a memoir of, to some extent, of your mother, of Beulah, it's a wonderful name. It's about Beulah's endurance and her sacrifice. And it's also the story of you as a child, as a teen, as a young man, and we're going to talk about your teen years. How do you write memoir about another person? I come to this a lot when I'm teaching and people say, I want to write a memoir about X person outside of me. And the answer always is, no, you can't. But you've kind of done that. You've kind of done that.
Yeah, because my answer is always, yes, you can. And one way I do it is, and maybe this is due to the fact that I write fiction, and I actually started as a fiction writer. I just use my imagination. I take the facts that I have, the facts that I know about my father before I was born, and I use those facts to imagine a life for him. Now, maybe I get it wrong. I'm not saying I get it right all the time, but I try to stay as true as I can to what the facts suggest.
Yeah.
And so, you can do a lot of different things craft-wise to write the story of someone else within your own story. As I say, you can use the imagined scene. I imagine that moment in the doctor's office. I don't know that that's exactly how it went down, but that's how I choose to imagine it. You can play tricks with point of view. You can write about yourself in the third person from the point of view of somebody else. you can do a long shot of somebody looking through a window, for instance, as seeing you, seeing me bathe my father.
Yeah.
That's a scene from my first memoir, From Our House. And I'm glad, Jessica, that you pointed out that this book really does focus primarily upon my mother. Of course, you know, I have to write about my father and able to tell my mother's story, but
Right.
this memoir was particularly meant to tell my mother's story. So thank you for mentioning that.
One of the things I want to ask you is about research, but I'm going to bounce back to that because talking about your mother gave you books. There's a scene at the beginning of the book where your mother and father disagree with something your mother does about getting books for you. And throughout this book, there's a wonderful through line of inventing stories, right? How books and telling stories comes to play in your life. The books that your mother got you, there was a tradition in your school where people were asked to tell stories about what their weekend. You write fiction and nonfiction. So talk to me a little bit about inventing stories in nonfiction and about the through line of storytelling in this book, how storytelling, the act of storytelling works in Gone the Hard Road. I love the scene with the books, the mail order books behind the car seat.
Yeah, my mom enrolled me in a children's classics book club when I was probably first or second grade. And so, you know, they operated just like any book club. If you didn't send in your refusal note, you'd get a book in the mail. And I remember getting books like Captain's Courageous and Kidnapped and Penrod and Sam, the Booth Tarkington book. Lots of other books I can remember as well. But my father wasn't particularly happy that we were spending money on books for me. My father was not a reader. He read the newspapers, he read farm equipment manuals, he read seed catalogs, and he read the Bible. But my mother was a huge reader. And so the scene that Jessica's referring to is one in which I'm in my dad's truck and I find hidden behind the seat a box that's come with a book in it for me. And my father is insistent that we're going to send this book back. And my mother actually stands up to him and says, no, we're not. And I think even then I think she probably sensed that I wasn't meant for that farm life. You know, I knew enough about farming to be really dangerous. And I think she sensed that I was meant for a life away from that place, and that books were my ticket out. I really believe that.
Yeah.
Jessica, I'm going to have to ask you to go back to the question because I've talked so long, I've forgotten.
It was convoluted. The other part of the question was there's a scene that happens definitely once, maybe twice in the book. There's, as I recall it, and I don't have a page citation, there was a tradition in your school where kids would talk about their weekend and they were encouraged to make stuff up.
Well, I think it was in the fourth grade. Every Monday, my teacher would ask everyone what they did over the weekend. And kids being kids, boys being boys particularly, I'm sure all those stories were embellished. There were lots of things to do with boating and killing bears with rifles and stuff like that. And I know that shit wasn't going on. I know it wasn't. But anyway, your question about storytelling, to me, that's exactly what memoir is. It's telling a story, telling a true story in an artful way, but sometimes the facts invite you to invent stories. And sometimes those invented stories are closer to the truth than the true stories are.
What does that mean? You know, because we've got a question in the Q&A or in the chat about imagination in creative nonfiction. And I'm a big research person. And so where is the bridge? Where's the connection between research and making something up that is truer than true?
Right. Well, the first thing, you have to be clear with your reader that you are relying upon imagination. You know, it's not that I'm suggesting that you get to just lie in memoir.
Shooting bears with rifles over the weekend, right? Yeah.
Right. But for instance, I think anyone who writes about parents usually comes up to that moment where they have to think about how their parents met, where they met, how they fell in love, all of that. And sometimes we have stories of that. Sometimes we don't. I had a few facts about my mother was a grade school teacher, and she, in the evenings and on the weekends, on Saturdays, she worked in the general store that her parents ran, which was 2 miles to the west of my father's farm. And he would go to the store and he would wait and wait and wait until everyone had gone home. And then he would help my mother close down the store. And that's all I know about how they met.
Yeah.
So from that, I can do something like, let's imagine that one night, my father says to my mother, "You're a woman of a certain age, and I'm a man of a certain age. How about we throw in together?"
Throw in.
Now, I have no idea that that's the way that happened, but I like imagining it that way based upon what I know about my father not being a particularly romantic sort. And so that's an example of how you can use what you know to be true to imagine something that may add a layer of truth to experience.
Yeah. And they did throw in together. And your mother did stand up to your father periodically. I'm thinking of parts of the book where she went to work in town, basically in a whole nother place, and the family went with. You want to talk about that a little bit and how that affected you growing up?
Oh, absolutely. That was I think that was a huge factor in my becoming a writer, and I'll explain that in just a moment. When I was getting ready to start the 3rd grade, my mother had lost her teaching position in southeastern Illinois, and she started applying for teaching jobs and ended up getting one in Oak Forest, Illinois, which was a southern suburb of Chicago. So we really went the hard road when we moved to Chicagoland, and it was a huge cultural shock for me. To go from a 2-room school in southeastern Illinois to this large elementary school in the suburbs of Chicago. And we would go back to the farm for Thanksgiving, Christmas, and we spent the entire summer on the farm. And then we would go back to Oak Forest for the new school year. And I never felt that I quite belonged in Oak Forest because I was the kid from Southern Illinois with the Southern Illinois twang. And then when I went back downstate to our farm, I didn't belong there either because now I'd been to the big city and all the kids thought I was a city slicker. I remember them calling me that.
City slicker.
And so I think that I always had to be ultra aware of my surroundings and the habits and customs of the place in a way that made me very, very observant because I was always trying to fit in. I was always trying to observe what I needed to know in order to fit in. And a few years back, I remember reading a theory of creativity that talked about how how being caught between 2 cultures sometimes becomes a factor in people who become artists of whatever type you want to consider. And I really do think it's connected to that thing of having to watch very, very closely,
Yeah.
pay attention. So that's how that worked out for me. But yeah, we were up there. I was there from 3rd grade until I graduated from middle school. And then we came back downstate to start my high school years.
Yeah. I'm thinking about, wasn't it Henry James who said a writer is someone on whom nothing is lost?
Yeah.
In terms of.
Yeah, James said, try to be the sort of person upon whom nothing is lost.
Yeah, then there you have it. So talking about observing, talk to us about Goofus and Gallant and their role in this book. We had kind of a sidebar conversation about this before we started. So the first thing we have to do is explain to some of the attendees who Goofus and Gallant were, and then talk to us about their importance to you in this book.
Okay, so everybody remember a magazine called Highlights for Children? I always saw it in the doctor's office or the dentist's office. We couldn't afford a subscription, so it was always in some kind of medical office where I would see this magazine. And it was the greatest dang magazine for kids. They had things like Find the Hidden Picture. You know, you'd have this drawing of some sort of family scene usually, and there'd be all sorts of things like shoehorns or oil cans turned every which way in this picture, and you had to find those hidden objects. Then they had this feature called Goofus and Gallant, which was actually intended, I think, as to be instructive for kids. This is the way you should live your life, right? So you would have these 2 panels side by side, one featuring a character called Goofus and one featuring a character called Gallant. And one of them might say something like, Goofus always draws in the margins of his library books. And of course, the subtext is you shouldn't do that. And then next to it would be the Gallant panel that would say, Gallant always treats his library books with respect. And again, it's being reinforced. This is the way you should behave. And so, I think a lot of my childhood was me being caught between Goofus and Gallant, right?
Yeah.
You said you were going to talk about my teenage years. That's when it really I had my lost year when I was 15. Fell in with the wrong crowd, started doing the wrong things, et cetera, et cetera. But I was always sort of caught between my father's roughness and my mother's compassion. My father's brutality, my mother's love.
Yeah.
And I really saw that played out in my teenage years when I was, like so many of us were, just sort of lost and trying to figure out exactly who we were. So then I didn't know if I was Goofus or Gallant. I was Goofus for a lot of my teenage years, but I really wanted to be Gallant.
Yeah, there are a lot of Goofus moments in here, but I was a Goofus fan as a kid. So, he was like who I was aspiring to. But there were definite Goofus moments in here. And I do have to tell you that Wipeout is boss. So do you want to talk a little bit about that? As a drummer, I just loved that section.
Well, that's an illustration of what I was talking about as far as being caught between 2 cultures. One summer I came back to Oak Forest after being on the farm for the summer. And I was listening to my radio all the time that summer. And I see Erin McGraw in the audience, and she knows that I know my music. But anyway, I was listening to all the hits that summer, but I got up to Oak Forest, and a friend of mine was playing Wipeout with his drumsticks, and I didn't know the song, and they were all making fun of me because I didn't know that Wipeout was boss, which was one of the things we said back in the mid '60s. It was boss. And yeah, I didn't know it. Somehow I'd missed that. And so I was suspect with my friends because I hadn't been with them all summer listening to Wipeout.
I love that. You told me when I interviewed you years ago for Braving the Fire, I talked to you about From Our House and about your teaching. And you told me then that writing nonfiction begins with curiosity, contradiction, confusion, and then the writer has somewhere to go. So talk to us about the curiosity that led to writing this book.
Oh, the curiosity that led to writing this particular book.
Yeah, this particular book, Gone the Hard Road.
Yeah. It was basically a curiosity about how my mother managed to operate within this marriage to my father in a way that was beneficial to me. I was trying to figure out how she did that because my father was a controlling sort of man. My mother was often considered to be a meek person, but she had a fierceness that she displayed when she needed to display it. But for the most part, she was quiet, unassuming, happy to let my father run things in the marriage. And so I got really curious about how she managed to keep herself, to keep her own identity within that type of marriage. And I was also really curious about how she performed the role of a mother, a role that she never thought that she would have.
Yeah.
As I said, she was 45 when I was born, and I was not supposed to come along. And I'm assuming that she had never given much thought. In fact, one of the things I think is so ironic is that she spent her entire professional career teaching other women's children, and finally had a child of her own. And I got really curious about how she stepped into that role and how she tried to make that role work for her.
Yeah, and it comes through very clearly in this book, as with all good memoir. The thing that's happening in this book is the the inquisitiveness that you have, and the love for your mother, and the self-reckoning, and it really moves through so beautifully. There's also humor in this book. I don't want it to come across as too dark. Like your mother, you are a natural teacher. You've taught me. I think you may have taught some other people in this digital room, and you explain in very patient way in the text here the way a riddle works, how a riddle works, and also the way irony works. How does teaching writing, which is what you do for one of your jobs, how does that connect you with Beulah?
Oh, wow. That's a great question.
There you go. Also, I'm sure everybody here knows, but Lee has a wonderful blog that has writing craft notes and prompts that I teach from it a lot.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for mentioning that. How does my teaching connect me to my mother? Well, it absolutely does. I always wanted to be a teacher. I remember when I was very, very young, my mother was teaching, and I was probably first or second grade. And I remember one night I said to my mother, I'm going to make a test for your students. And she said, okay, you can do that, like a good mother would, right?
Yeah.
And inside she's probably thinking, well, that's silly. So I came up with these questions like, how many stars are in the sky? They were, ridiculous questions that nobody could answer. And I gave it to my mother, and I said, now you can give this test to your students. And she took it with her to school. And when she came home, she told me that she had indeed given the test to her students, and they had done very, very well on it. And I'm sure she didn't. I'm sure she didn't do that at all. But that's an example of how she encouraged me, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So when I teach, I actually feel her moving through me when I teach. I feel her patience. I feel her encouragement. I feel her clarity. I feel her calmness. And I think whatever I've done right as a teacher, and I'm sure there's plenty that I haven't done right, but whatever I've done right is because of my mother.
Yeah. Isn't it interesting how they're around? The people we've lost, they're around
They
in,
always are. They
in,
always are.
in some way.
Yeah.
You
So,
read? Oh, go ahead.
well, I was going to say, you were talking about irony, which I think is one of the best things a writer learns, the use of irony. And there's an episode in the book when I'm in the fourth grade again, I think. Boy, I had trouble in the fourth grade. My fourth grade teacher, by the way, told me once that I had absolutely no imagination. So
She was wrong.
when I published a story in Glimmer Train, we had to give him the little childhood photo. I gave him my fourth grade photo and I told the story about my teacher and I dedicated the story to her. But anyway, in fourth grade, we were having a hepatitis outbreak, and so we couldn't share lunches, drink out of the water fountain, all that kind of stuff. And I remember there was a little girl named April Renevere that I had a secret crush on, and she was just the nicest little girl, and sort of quiet and pretty, and just captured my heart. And one morning, my teacher asked April, April's father had hepatitis, and Mrs. Malley asked April how her father was doing, and April said, "Well, he's doing much, much better, thank you." And my hand shot up because I was a teacher's kid. I always wanted to impress my teachers. And I picked up this little fact that hepatitis could be really, really serious, right? And so I raise my hand and Mrs. Malley calls on me and I say, "Isn't it true that you can die from hepatitis?" And April Renevere just throws herself over her desk sobbing. "Oh, oh, oh." And Mrs. Malley looks at me and says, "Oh, how could you?" And that was one of my early lessons in irony. I thought I would impress April with my knowledge.
Yeah.
Right? But I created a completely different result.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that's one of my first lessons with irony. And I think it's so important for writers to really to understand how irony works.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And there's just so much in this book that is teaching in a very gentle way without being sort of overtly teaching. But yeah, I remember that scene, and that also struck me as a Goofus moment.
Oh yeah, as a total
Very. Couple more questions from me, and then I want to go to your readers and see what they want to know. Talk to me about research. What kind of research did you do for this book?
Oh, well, it's mainly old family photographs. My family didn't leave a lot behind, but they did leave certain artifacts behind. Farm equipment manuals that my father had scribbled notes on, kept baseball scores on.
Yeah.
Letters, a few letters that he had written my mother when he was in the hospital in St. Louis being fitted for his prostheses. And then things that, just a few years ago, my wife Kathy and I went down to the old farm, which I sold in 1996, but we got permission from the owners to go down to the farm, and a tree had fallen on the house. The house was pretty much demolished and just debris. But there were certain things that we were able to, just accidentally carry out of there. We took a part of an old door casing that my wife Kathy, being the talented lady that she is, hey baby, I see you out there. She turned it into a shelf on which we put our family artifacts. So it's just, whatever I have that people leave behind, right? But then for some of the more current things, there was, there were newspaper reports to read and stuff like that.
Okay. Because I'm always curious about how research makes story. And you and I have had many conversations about how photographs, how family photographs make story, and how we, the people of the family, see one thing, and a person who's not familiar with the photograph sees something very else.
Well, research should be a creative process. And so it's finding those particular details or those artifacts or those photographs. That's what really starts to create narrative for me, not only in memoir, but in the historical novels that I write,
Yeah.
anything that's set in a particular time period. I've got to start by immersing myself in that world through what I can find from that world.
Yes, exactly. There's a question in the chat that I pulled up that asks, what do you enjoy writing most, fiction or nonfiction?
Oh, both, absolutely both. I never meant to be a nonfiction writer, but my first tenure track teaching job, they assigned me a graduate workshop in creative nonfiction. And I thought, oh, if I'm going to teach somebody how to write this, I better write some of it myself. So for the very first time, I wrote directly about my father's accident, a little essay called From Our House, that then became my first memoir. But I write nonfiction when I sense that there's something about the experience that first I don't quite understand. I always say in nonfiction, it's best to write what you don't know rather than what you do know. So that's kind of the first thing that draws me to it. And then the second thing is I have a sense that there's something important about claiming that experience as my experience. When I wrote the first memoir, From Our House, it was really an attempt to understand my father's cruelty, to understand the life he lived, and why he lived the life he did. And I remember getting to the end of the first draft of that memoir and really just weeping. And I understood later that I'd written myself to an understanding of his anger, and I had written myself out of the legacy of anger that he left me.
Yeah. Yeah. Because this book, and that's beautiful, and because this book is focused more on your mother than your father, I want to wrap this up and then go to questions. But my last question for you is that you and I both, in our own ways, come from what you call in this book a house of sorrow, in which our mothers tried to create light in darkness created by our fathers. And you write that you wish your mother were alive now so that you could tell her that, quote, her efforts were not in vain.
Right.
What did Beulah want for you, and why are her efforts not in vain?
Well, I think she wanted me to have the life that I couldn't have in that place. I really think she wanted me to embrace and develop my talent. And it was clear to her from an early age that I was a language-driven kid, whether that was telling stories or reading the captions on film strips in my grade school, or telling.
That was your job in class, right?
Yeah, I was the designated caption reader. And so I think that's what she wanted. She wanted me to really embrace my talents and develop them. The sad thing, of course, is it took me away from her, because I went off to college. I went to an MFA program at the University of Arkansas. I left my mom in her widowhood. I wasn't there for her when I should have been there for her. And that's a guilt that will always stay with me. But I don't think her efforts were in vain, because I'm blessed. I'm blessed to have the life I have. I'm blessed to be able to do what I always wanted to do, which was to write and to teach. And that doesn't happen for everyone. And I know every day how lucky and blessed I am to have that life.
And how happy she would be to see it.
Absolutely. She made that possible for me.
What haven't I asked you? What do you want to talk about that hasn't come up?
Oh, I don't know. You've been really good with your questions. You kept me on my toes. You're right. There's a lot of humor in this book. We even tell jokes from time to time in the book, and like you said, I talk about how jokes work and stuff like that. Um, you know, the thing my mother really wanted for me was to be a Christian man. And I tried really, really hard. And that was the one thing I'm pretty sure disappointed her. I found a little letter that she had written me when I was in the MFA program at Arkansas, where she's talking about her garden and how things haven't come up. And maybe when I come home, she'll have some spinach or some lettuce. And you know, what I hear in those words are, you know, my life is barren, but there's always hope, right? Yeah. And she says to me at the end of that letter, P.S., if you could only start attending church, everything would be wonderful. And I just never could make it. I just couldn't do it.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
We have a question here in the chat. Letta asks, when was it possible for you to begin publishing intimate memoirs of your mother and father?
Well, I waited until they were gone, Letta. I didn't write about them until they were both dead. I guess that was one of the advantages of being the only child of much older parents. They exited this world in enough time for me to write about them when I needed to write about them without worrying about what they would think about that. So yeah, by the time I started writing about them, I had pretty much accepted the fact that these were stories that I needed to tell. They were my stories to tell. And so I didn't quite worry about what the cousins were going to think, et cetera, because I knew it was important for me, not only for my understanding of my past, but also for my movement into the future. Because I think, and I remember Patricia Hampel saying this, that, you know, the memoir is not about the past. The memoir is about the future. And I really believe that.
You write, and I'm just keeping an eye on the chat. So ask away, folks, as it's getting darker and darker where I am, and I don't actually know where the overhead lights are in this room. So you may just end up hearing my voice for the next few minutes. You write that reckoning with our past rescues us from damage. That's a quote I'm paraphrasing from Gone the Hard Road. How does reckoning with our past rescue us from damage?
Wow, I said that.
Page 33. Page 33.
Well, I think that if we don't write about our past, we're sometimes doomed to stay in that past, to live in it always. You know, I write about my own experience because something's unresolved, right?
Mm. I
have to write about it to get a deeper understanding of it. And once I get a deeper understanding of it, I escape it.
Yeah. It frees you in a way.
I see that George had a question about what's
He does. Yeah. George says, what's up next, Lee? Hi, George.
Hi, George. I've got a new novel I think is going to come out next year. We're going to have to do a little bit of revising, but that's probably next. And then I'm working right now on, well, I just finished another memoir. Good God, another memoir? No, that can't be. But it's a book about my adult life. Specifically, it's the story of Kathy and me. And if we can publish that one without getting sued, we'll probably do that. And then I'm working right now on a sequel to The Bright Forever.
Oh, wow.
a book that ended with the main character, Henry Dees, driving off into the sunset. And I always wondered where he went and what happened to him once he got there. So we're working on that right now.
That my TBR, my to be read pile is stacking up in my head now. There's a question here from Amy, handwriting question. She says, I've heard some people say that for memoir, writing by hand brings them closer to the material or unearths memories, and keyboards don't do that. So Amy is curious about the method question. I think writing with a pen versus keyboard.
Yeah. Well, Amy, I think you're absolutely onto something there. You know, I used to write solely by hand. Then I got seduced by the keyboard, and it does save a lot of time writing that way, composing that way. But I can tell you, Amy, that anytime I get stuck, I don't know where I'm going, I don't know what I'm writing about, etc. I pick up the pad and pen, and it slows me down in a good way. It slows me down and it helps me find my way. And there's always been something to me about the rhythm of my hand moving across the page that starts to capture the rhythm of the language, the tone, etc., the voice, etc. So yeah, I'm still a fan of writing by hand, particularly when I'm stuck.
Wow. I'm jealous of that because my handwriting is truly atrocious.
Well,
It is so bad, actually. My students have actually done an intervention with me. I've come into the classroom and they've said, Professor Handler, we need to talk to you about your handwriting. So I mean, they literally staged an intervention. So I don't write by hand, but I'm jealous of the concept. It's proprioceptive writing is what it's called, I think.
Yeah. Oh, wow, that's a great.
Yeah.
My handwriting.
I think that's.
My handwriting is horrible, Jessica. And so I often can't read what I've written, and I have to kind of think hard about what those words are on the page.
Well, that may be the point too, is like, what was I trying to do here in this mess? Mess is referring to mine. Gail O'Neill asks, did the experience of having less than an ideal amount of family memorabilia at your disposal during the research time cause you to rethink what you saved or threw away for the next generation?
Well, that's a really good question. First of all, let me make it clear that I didn't face the decision of what to throw away very much because my parents just didn't leave very much behind. Although I do have a few things I let go at auction that I wish I hadn't. When it comes to my own stuff, oh Lord, I don't care. Just somebody else is going to have to deal with it. And that's fine.
We've got time for one more question. Jolene asks, question about your process, and I want to know this too because you write so prolifically and so well. Question about your process. What does your writing day look like?
Oh, it looks different depending on the time of year. Right now it looks great because I'm not teaching and I get up in the morning and I get to work and, you know, I can spend 3-4 hours maybe. Beyond that, I'm pretty much getting sloppy at that point and I have to stop. But during the school year, usually I can spend a couple of hours each morning, maybe an hour, maybe 2 hours. And it's amazing how the pages start to pile up no matter what period of time you have to spend. 30 minutes. The key to me has always been consistency, to be religious about doing it, because I think the more you do it, the more you write. It's sort of self-generative. So I just encourage everyone to just have a regular writing routine, whether that's a period of minutes or a period of hours.
I take your words very seriously and I read your writing blog pretty regularly. So what I want to do, I think we're going to wrap it up. Jackie, we're at 8 o'clock, aren't we? Coming in at 8 here?
Yeah, just a couple more minutes.
Okay, so what I want to do here, you've got, Lee, you've got a comment from someone who went to high school with you, Linda.
Linda. Okay.
Do you see it in the chat?
Oh, here we go. Oh, Linda.
Linda's-
Hi, Linda. Hi, I know.
Hi.
Yeah. You say, having gone to high school with you, your memoirs hit home, and I always love to try to figure out who you were talking about because you changed the names to protect the innocent. You're
Of
absolutely
course.
right, Linda. I do. Because an editor once said to me, you volunteer to be on the page. Those other people, they don't volunteer to be on the page. And so if I'm writing about people who are, not part of my family's story, but sort of on the periphery of that story, I do change the names just to kind of protect identities. Thanks so much for being here, Linda.
You're welcome. Thank you.
You bet.
So I want to thank Lee for being here, and I want to thank all of you for joining us tonight and asking wonderful questions and listening to Lee talk memoir and talk stories. And I want to recommend this book, Gone the Hard Road. Here it is. And also From Our House, and also all of Lee's books, as well as Lee's regular blog, just about the writing life. And Lee, how do they find that? It's not in my head.
I put it in the chat.
You can,
Okay. Jackie's going to post it in the chat.
okay.
And let's see. And then you can, of course, get Gone the Hard Road through Hub City. And there are buy links for the book, for all of Lee's books at the top of the chat. And I think Jackie's going to post it again. And thank you all so much. This has been wonderful. Kathy, I know you're here somewhere, so hi. And Lee, it's nice to see you even in a little box on, I have you stacked up on a pile of pillows on our table.
Great to see you too. And thank you so much, Jessica, for facilitating this. And thank you, Jackie, for everything you did to make this possible. And thanks to all of you for coming out and spending a little time with us.
Thank you.
You guys have been incredible. I just want to make a quick note. There was a couple of questions about how to get the book. So I put the buy link again in the chat, and I just shipped out all of the signed books today. So if you bought a copy, you will get them soon, and you should have an email with the tracking so you can check up on it and make sure you're going to get it. But yeah, they're gorgeous, and I just want to show he did send us, let me find the signature page. There's the signature page right there. So
Right there.
you'll get a signed copy of his memoir, and I hope that you read it and love it as much as we did. Jessica, your questions were fantastic, and Lee, you're just so frank and willing to talk about this, and we really appreciate it.
You're very welcome. Thank you all.
We'll see y'all. Take
Have a good
care,
night,
everybody. Stay
everybody.
safe.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, Jessica. Bye, Lee.
Bye, y'all.